caught my wife cheating, took revenge quietly, and now I'm divorcing after she blames me for her mistake. It all started the night I found out. I didn't expect betrayal to come crashing through the door of my seemingly perfect marriage. But there it was, a message notification lighting up her phone screen as she cooked dinner. It was just the two of us at the table. My curiosity got the best of me, so I glanced over. The text preview was nothing innocent. That simple peek turned my world upside down. My heart raced as I read the words that shouldn't have been directed at my wife. I had no idea who the number was, but the message spoke of meeting up later, and it wasn't for work or anything else that would make sense for a married woman. I didn't say a word to her that night. I kept it bottled inside as I followed my routine, kissing her cheek as if nothing had changed. But inside, my mind was turning like a blender on high. That night, I lay awake beside her, watching the ceiling and replaying the last few months in my head. There had been so many signs, each one innocent in its own way. A canceled date night, a sudden surge in gym visits, and her newfound habit of keeping her phone within arm's reach at all times. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind, so trusting. The pieces started to fall into place, and every quiet moment with her that I had cherished suddenly felt like a lie. I knew what I had to do. If this was going to end, it would end on my terms. I wasn't going to be the one blindsided by her lies. I decided then and there that I would gather evidence quietly. And once I had the truth in my hands, I'd make her face it. I began my investigation the next day. She left for work around 8, her phone clutched tightly in her hand as she said goodbye with the same smile I used to find comforting. Now, that smile made my stomach churn. I waited until she drove off, then pulled out my laptop. I had some experience with tech, and it wasn't hard to install tracking software on her phone through the shared account. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but given the circumstances, I didn't care. I had to know. By midday, I saw her location in real time. She wasn't at her office. Instead, she was at a hotel across town. I sat there, staring at the map, unable to believe my eyes. The rage building inside me was volcanic, but I kept calm, reminding myself that my time would come. The notifications kept coming, texts and calls that confirmed my suspicions. Later that night, she acted as if nothing was wrong, talking about her day and asking about mine. I just nodded, watching her closely, wondering how long she thought she could keep up this charade. As the days passed, I saw her schedule unfold like clockwork. She'd go to work, then find a reason to slip away for an errand or meeting. Sometimes, it was a 2-hour lunch. Other times, she didn't come home until later, claiming work had run late. I followed her patterns for a week, watching her move between work, home, and her affair. But I wanted more than just location pings and a few incriminating texts. I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't weasel her way out of. With her pattern locked down, I planned my next move. I knew if I wanted irrefutable proof, I'd have to catch her in the act. It was a twisted kind of game, waiting for the right moment, pretending everything was fine. And all the while, she carried on as if I was oblivious. The hardest part was keeping a calm front around her, not letting a hint of my anger slip through. Every smile she flashed me felt like a slap to the face, but I played along. One day, she texted that she'd be working late again. This time, I decided to take action. I drove out to the hotel she'd frequented, hoping I'd finally have my answer. I parked a few spots away and waited, eyes fixed on the entrance. Sure enough, her car pulled up, and she stepped out, looking around as if checking for anyone she knew. I slouched in my seat, heart pounding, as I watched her walk inside. A few minutes later, a man I didn't recognize strolled in after her. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of guy I could picture her with when I wasn't around. Rage coursed through me, but I forced myself to stay focused. I wasn't here to blow up, I was here for proof. I slipped out of the car, heart hammering, and followed them. After a quick conversation with the receptionist, I slipped into the elevator with one purpose, to catch them together. As I reached their floor, I felt a mixture of adrenaline and dread, but I knew this was the only way to end the lies. I reached the door and paused, taking a deep breath. My hand hovered over my phone as I recorded, every part of me wired and ready. My mind replayed years of memories, the vacations, the lazy Sundays, the whispered promises. It was as if those moments were slipping through my fingers, replaced by the bitter reality of betrayal. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to catch a glimpse. I pushed it open a fraction more, careful not to make a sound. There she was, wrapped up in his arms, completely unaware. They were laughing, whispering, and the sight sent a wave of nausea through me. Here was the woman I had trusted with my life, holding someone else with the same warmth she used to reserve for me. I snapped a few photos, keeping the phone as steady as I could while my hands shook. The images weren't perfect, but they were enough. Enough to capture her betrayal, to finally confront her with undeniable proof. I stepped back from the door, my mind already spinning with what I'd do next. I couldn't confront her here. I had to stay calm, keep my plan intact. If I blew up now, she'd just twist it all around. As I turned to leave, I heard her laugh, the sound digging into my skin like broken glass. It took every ounce of willpower not to turn back and throw open that door, to demand answers right then and there. But I forced myself to walk away, focusing on the evidence I had. The game wasn't over yet. I had one last card to play, and I would make sure it counted. Back at home, I sat in silence, staring at the pictures on my phone. My hands trembled as I relived those agonizing minutes outside their hotel room. The betrayal was like a bruise that deepened every time I looked at those photos, every time I thought about what I'd seen. I wanted to scream, to shatter something, to let the rage escape. But I knew I had to keep my emotions in check if I was going to get the closure I deserved. That night, I barely slept. She came home a little after midnight, her steps light as she moved around, probably thinking I was asleep. She climbed into bed beside me, and I lay still, feeling her warmth, the scent of her perfume mingling with another man's cologne. I swallowed hard, my hands clenched in fists beneath the sheets. Morning came, and I watched her go through her usual routine as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me, making small talk, even asked if I wanted her to pick up anything from the store. I played along, smiling back and nodding, but inside, I felt like I was watching a stranger, someone I once knew but who now felt cold, foreign. Once she left, I put my plan into action. I needed to make sure she couldn't deny what she'd done. I spent the entire day gathering everything. The texts, the locations, the photos, all neatly compiled. I even called a lawyer, laying out my case and ensuring everything was ready. By the time she came home that evening, I had my evidence, my plan, and a cold sense of resolve. When she walked through the door, I was waiting, sitting at the dining room table with a folder in front of me. She looked at me, her smile faltering when she noticed the tension in my face. "Is everything okay?" she asked, a slight tremor in her voice. I met her gaze, feeling the fury simmering beneath my calm expression. "We need to talk." Her face drained of color as she took a tentative step forward, eyes darting to the folder on the table. I could see her calculating, her mind racing to figure out what this could be about. She must have suspected something, because she hesitated, as if weighing her options. What's this about?" she stammered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down. I think it's time we have a real conversation." Reluctantly, she sat, keeping her gaze fixed on the folder. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the table, betraying the anxiety she was trying to hide. I let the silence linger, watching her squirm, savoring this moment. She didn't deserve mercy, not after what she put me through. After a long pause, I slid the folder across to her. "Go ahead. Open it." She looked at me, confusion mingling with a flicker of fear. She reached for the folder, her hands shaking as she flipped it open. The first photo, of her in that hotel room with him, was enough to shatter her composure. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She flipped through the rest, each image and screenshot like a blow to whatever facade she'd been trying to maintain. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. I can explain." I cut her off, my tone icy. "Don't bother. I don't want to hear your excuses. You've lied to me for months, made a fool of me, and for what? So you could sneak around behind my back?" She looked down, her hands clenched into fists on her lap. "I never meant. I didn't think you'd find out." The audacity of her words hit me like a slap. I let out a bitter laugh. That's what bothers you? That I found out? She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away, standing up and putting distance between us. This marriage? It's over. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. But don't think you're getting off that easy. Her eyes were wide, tears streaming down her cheeks now. What do you mean? I crossed my arms, my voice steady. You'll see soon enough. Her panic was evident. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to grasp the reality of the situation. She probably thought I'd blow up, shout, or lose my temper. But the calm, calculated way I was handling this was something she hadn't anticipated. I trusted you, I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. We built a life together, and you threw it all away for, what? Some fling with a stranger? She shook her head, her voice trembling. It wasn't like that. He just understood me in ways you didn't. I was lonely and... Lonely? I interrupted, incredulous. You had everything you could have asked for. I worked hard to provide for us, to make sure we had a future. And instead of talking to me about whatever you were feeling, you decided to go behind my back? She shrank back, but I could see a flash of defiance in her eyes. You were always busy with work. I felt like I was living with a ghost. You were here, but you weren't really here. I let out a bitter laugh, the irony almost laughable. So, that justifies cheating? Because I was working to support us? Her face twisted with frustration, but she didn't respond. There was nothing she could say to defend her actions, and she knew it. I let the silence fill the room, each second more uncomfortable than the last. Finally, I broke the tension. I'm done with this marriage. I've already talked to a lawyer. You'll be getting divorce papers by the end of the week. Her eyes filled with panic again, and she shook her head, reaching out as if to stop me. No, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to therapy. We can work it out, she pleaded, her voice thick with desperation. I shook my head, a cold determination settling over me. There's nothing to fix. You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine. She looked at me, her face crumbling as the reality hit her. I could see the regret, the dawning horror of what she'd thrown away. But it was too late for regrets. The damage was done, and I had no intention of letting her back into my life. She sat there, frozen, her face pale, hands trembling. For a moment, I felt a twinge of satisfaction seeing her so utterly lost, knowing she was only just beginning to feel the pain she'd inflicted on me. But that satisfaction was fleeting. All that remained was a hollow sense of betrayal, a wound too deep to heal with her tears. I don't understand, she whispered, looking down at her hands. After everything we've been through, you're just walking away? I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm walking away because you already destroyed what we had. You killed any chance of you at the moment you decided that this, I gestured to the pictures in front of her, was more important than our marriage. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking as she wept. But her tears didn't move me. They felt hollow, insincere, like a last-ditch effort to manipulate me into forgiving her. And I wasn't about to let myself be fooled again. I'll leave you with the house, I continued, ignoring her sobs. I've got a place lined up for myself. You can keep the car, the furniture, everything. Consider it my parting gift. Her head shot up, eyes red and swollen. You're just leaving everything? Just like that? I shrugged, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I don't want any of it. Not if it means staying connected to you. I'm starting fresh, and that doesn't include you or any of this. I gestured to the house around us, now feeling more like a prison than a home. Her expression shifted, a flash of anger breaking through her sorrow. So, that's it? You're just throwing it all away? Because of one mistake? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. This isn't just a mistake. This is a betrayal. You've been lying to me for months. I can't live with someone who'd do that to me. She stood up abruptly, knocking the chair back, her anger spilling over. Fine, go. But don't come crawling back when you realize how much you're throwing away. I did what I did because I was miserable, and you were too blind to see it." Her words stung, but I refused to let her have the last say. Miserable? Then maybe you'll finally get what you wanted. A life without me. I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of the life she'd destroyed. My chest felt tight as I crossed the threshold, knowing I'd never look back. The cool evening air hit me as I stepped outside, filling my lungs and clearing my head. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the house we'd shared. A house filled with memories that now felt tarnished, as if every wall had absorbed her lies and betrayal. I took one last look, my mind made up, then started the engine and drove away. The drive to my new place felt surreal, like I was caught between two worlds, the one I'd built with her and the unknown future I was hurtling toward. I hadn't expected to feel so much relief, but as the distance grew between me and that house, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. I was free, finally free from the lies and the charade. When I reached my new apartment, I sat on the bed and stared at the empty walls. There was a hollow feeling in my chest, but it was better than the anger and bitterness that had consumed me these past weeks. I was on my own now, and as daunting as that felt, it was also strangely liberating. No more pretending, no more faking smiles. I could finally begin to heal. The next few days were a whirlwind. The divorce papers were filed, and I left her a final message about the details. She didn't respond, which suited me just fine. I threw myself into work, filling my days with projects and late nights, anything to keep my mind occupied. Friends reached out, sensing something was wrong, but I kept the story to myself. I didn't want pity or condolences. I just wanted to move on. But a week later, she texted me. The message was simple, almost too casual, as if she were trying to bridge the gap with something trivial. Asterisk, "Hey, can we talk? I think we both said things we didn't mean." Asterisk. I stared at the screen, feeling a flicker of anger rise up again. She thought this was something we could just brush over? I didn't respond. Instead, I deleted the message and went about my day. But the messages didn't stop. A few hours later, another one came. Asterisk, "I miss you. Can we at least try to work this out?" Asterisk. I ignored it, but deep down, I felt something stir, a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. She was finally feeling the pain she'd inflicted, but it didn't change anything. I was resolute. The past was where it belonged, behind me. Days turned into weeks, and she kept reaching out, her messages growing more desperate. She tried apologies, anger, bargaining, every tactic she could think of. I even received a message from her mother, asking me to consider giving her another chance. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. How quickly she had painted herself as the victim, twisting the narrative to fit her needs. But each message only reinforced my decision. I couldn't forgive her. There was no going back to the life we once had. So, I stayed silent, ignoring every plea, every thinly veiled accusation, every attempt at manipulation. My silence was my answer. And then, as if she sensed my resolve, the messages stopped. I thought that was the end of it, that maybe she'd finally moved on. But a few days later, I got a call from a mutual friend who'd heard through the grapevine that she was dating someone new. It was the same guy from the photos, the man she'd betrayed me with. I didn't feel the anger I expected. Instead, it was a strange sense of validation, like the final piece of evidence I needed. She hadn't loved me, not truly. Maybe she'd loved the idea of us, the life we had built, but not me. Not enough to choose loyalty over temptation. Knowing she'd moved on so quickly was just proof that I'd made the right decision to let her go. But while she moved on with her new relationship, I was left with the pieces of my life. I found myself replaying conversations we'd had, moments I thought were genuine, and I realized how much I had ignored, the signs I had brushed off, the trust one had given so freely. It was painful, but it was also a wake-up call. I wouldn't make those mistakes again. So, I focused on myself. I took up old hobbies, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, and even started going to the gym again. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was finding parts of myself I'd forgotten, parts she'd overshadowed with her presence. It felt good, liberating. For the first time in years, I felt whole, complete on my own. One evening, As I was unwinding after a long day at work, a knock sounded at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and most people would text or call before dropping by. Curiosity got the better of me, so I set down my coffee and opened the door. There she was, standing in the hallway, looking worn and defeated. She wasn't the composed, confident woman I'd been married to. She looked fragile, broken in a way I had never seen before. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but it vanished just as quickly. I reminded myself that she was the reason I was here, alone, starting from scratch. "I just need to talk," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes searched mine, looking for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding. But all she found was a hardened resolve. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "What could you possibly have to say now?" She took a shaky breath, hands twisting together as she struggled to find her words. "I made a mistake," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you, and I can't even begin to make up for what I did. But I didn't realize how much you meant to me until you were gone. I don't know how to let you go." Her words hung in the air, but they felt empty. I'd waited for her to feel that loss, but now that she did, it meant nothing. The time for apologies had passed. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. "You're only here because things didn't work out the way you thought they would. If he'd left his life for you, we wouldn't be having this conversation." She flinched, the truth hitting her harder than any insult could. But she didn't deny it. She just stood there, looking down, defeated. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know I don't deserve it, but can we at least try?" I looked at her, feeling nothing but a hollow sense of finality. She was asking for something that had died long before she'd shown up at my door. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. "Go home," I said firmly. "We're done." Her face crumpled, but I didn't budge. After a long, painful silence, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with nothing but the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. As her footsteps faded, I shut the door, leaning against it as a flood of emotions washed over me. I had done it. I had stood my ground, refused to let her back in, and finally put the last chapter of our story to rest. There was a strange sense of closure in that moment, a feeling I hadn't expected to come so quickly. I knew she was gone for good this time, but as the days went by, I found myself haunted by the memories, by what we had once shared and lost. I would catch myself recalling the better moments, the laughter, the dreams, the promises we had made. It felt surreal, knowing that all those things had come crashing down so quickly, that love could be so fragile, so easily torn apart. To shake off the lingering sorrow, I threw myself into new projects at work, picking up additional hours and volunteering for extra assignments. It felt good to have something that demanded my full focus, something that didn't leave space for thoughts of her. And little by little, I started to reclaim my peace. My new place felt like a sanctuary, a blank slate where I could rebuild. One weekend, I went out with some old friends, something I hadn't done in years. We hit a bar downtown, laughing and catching up on each other's lives. It felt good, like breathing fresh air after being trapped underwater for too long. One of my friends noticed the change in me, clapping me on the back and saying, "You seem different, happier." And he was right. I was different, stronger. The weight of the betrayal had lifted, replaced by a new sense of clarity. I was free to choose my future, unburdened by the lies and manipulation that had once tethered me to someone unworthy of my trust. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I felt a calm settle over me, a sense that I was finally moving on. I realized I didn't need closure from her, didn't need answers to all the whys that had plagued me. I had found my own closure, and it was enough. The months passed quickly after that night, and life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known in years. I felt lighter, more at ease, like I'd finally shed the weight of something that had been dragging me down for too long. I focused on building the things that mattered to me, my friendships, my career, and most importantly, myself. I reconnected with old hobbies, dusting off my guitar and rediscovering my love for music. I'd spend quiet evenings strumming on my balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, feeling a peace that I hadn't felt in years. I even joined a local hiking group, something I'd always wanted to do but had never made the time for. Being out there in the fresh air, surrounded by nature, gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't known I craved. But it wasn't until I ran into someone new that I realized how much I'd truly healed. It was on one of those hikes, actually. She was part of the group, a warm and confident woman named Rachel, with a laugh that could light up any room. At first, I thought nothing of it. We exchanged friendly hellos and small talk, just casual. But as the weeks went on, we found ourselves walking side by side more often, talking about everything from work to childhood memories. Rachel was different. She was open, unguarded, and refreshingly honest. There were no games, no pretense. And the best part? I felt no rush, no desperation to fill any void. For once, I felt like I could let things unfold naturally, without the pressure of trying to make something happen. One evening after a group hike, she invited me to grab coffee, and we ended up talking for hours. I told her about my past, about the betrayal that had once consumed me, and she listened with genuine empathy. She didn't judge or pity me. Instead, she shared her own stories, moments of hurt and loss she had endured, and we bonded over the strength it took to start over. It was the first time I'd felt connected to someone since my marriage ended, and it felt right. Rachel and I continued to see each other casually, letting things develop at their own pace. There was no rush, no need to define or label anything. For once, I was living in the moment, grateful for each new experience. She brought a lightness to my life, a sense of joy I hadn't known I was missing. The laughter we shared was easy, unforced, like I had known her for years. One evening, we found ourselves at a quiet little cafe after a hike. Rain pattered gently on the windows as we sat across from each other, steaming mugs in hand. She looked at me, her eyes warm and curious. "You're different, you know," she said, smiling. "You carry yourself like someone who's been through something but came out stronger." I let out a small chuckle, nodding. "I guess I've been through enough to learn a few things. I used to think life had a set path: marriage, stability, trust. But now, I know it's about resilience. Sometimes you have to rebuild from scratch." She reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. "And look at you. You're doing it." The sincerity in her voice hit me harder than I expected. I looked down at our hands, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't about filling a void or chasing away loneliness. Rachel was a friend, a confidant, someone who had come into my life not to fix me but to add to the happiness I'd rediscovered on my own. For the first time in years, I felt whole again, on my terms, in my own way. Rachel was an unexpected blessing, a reminder that while life may take us through trials and heartbreak, it can also surprise us with joy and companionship when we least expect it. As we walked out of the cafe that night, hand in hand, I looked up at the night sky, feeling a profound sense of peace. My past was where it belonged, behind me. I was ready for whatever lay ahead. Months later, as the seasons shifted from winter to the fresh promises of spring, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Life had taken me on a path I'd never anticipated, but it was one that had forged a new strength within me. The pain, the betrayal, all of it had carved a deeper resilience, a resilience I was now grateful for. In a strange way, it had shown me how to rebuild, how to value myself, and how to recognize the people worth holding on to. Rachel and I had grown closer, but still without pressure. We enjoyed each other's company, shared countless adventures, and supported each other in ways that were simple and true. And through it all, I'd come to see love not as something to cling to out of fear or desperation, but as something that could enrich my life without defining it. One weekend, as we sat on a grassy hill overlooking a quiet lake, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what you've been through and wonder if it was all meant to bring you here?" I looked out at the lake, the calm waters reflecting the blue sky, and nodded. "Sometimes, yeah. It's strange to think about how something so painful led to something so good." She smiled, leaning into my shoulder. "Life has a funny way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even if it doesn't make sense at first." In that moment, I realized she was right. The hurt, the loneliness, the upheaval, It had all been part of a journey that brought me to a place of peace and fulfillment I hadn't thought possible. And for the first time, I felt truly grateful for every twist and turn, every setback and breakthrough. As we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a quiet, unwavering certainty that I'd finally found my place. Not just with Rachel, but within myself. I'd learned to let go of the past, to accept life's challenges, and to embrace the future with hope. The past no longer haunted me. It had shaped me. And in that shaping, I'd found a version of myself I was proud of, a version ready to face whatever life had in store. And that was the journey. Sometimes, the hardest parts of our lives lead to the most beautiful chapters. If this story resonated with you, feel free to share your own experiences or let me know your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories of resilience, growth, and new beginnings.